días a todos. Soy Juan
Good morning
Pradas.
to you all. I am Juan Pradas. I am a technician of projects at the City Council of Zaragoza and working here at Etopia Center. I'm going to chair this panel. The panel will be in English. I'm sorry for those local participants. You can follow the simultaneous interpreting.
Si os parece, cambio al inglés. So, let me introduce briefly our speakers from this roundtable. First of all, we have Sonia, who is a journalist from training. She's working at Zaragoza Culture Department. She's in charge of the audience development program that she will explain in her keynote. And they have developed quite an interesting strategy, Zaragoza Escultura, in the last 3 years. Then we have Laure Dalon here on my right, who is she has a strong cultural background. She's the director of the Musée de Picardie in Amiens, in northern France, who is also a partner of our smARTplaces project. She's by training, she's a curator, as they say in French, conservateur de musée. I want to stress it. So she's the most, let's say, classic background, not to say it in a negative way, but I think it's very enriching for us at smARTplaces. And then we have Britta Lerch, who is the overall smARTplaces coordinator from Dortmunder, but for the whole project for the whole smARTplaces consortium. She shares with Sonia the fact that they both come from a marketing perspective, which is, I think, very, very enriching for us in a cultural project such as smARTplaces. Britta has worked for long years with the private sector, with the companies, before being involved with cultural institutions such as the Dortmunder, and she's been coordinating this project, involved in the project for the last 5 years already, and with 3 years since we started. Then, if it's okay, Sonia, I will pass it to you and go ahead in Spanish.
Thank you. I feel better in Spanish at home. Yo os voy a contar un poco la experiencia de Zaragoza de Escultura, la experiencia que hemos tenido.
A little bit about our experience, Zaragoza Cultura, our experience at the City Council of Zaragoza through 2 European projects, Adeste Projects and Adeste Plus. Zaragoza is a great example of how European projects work, and they have a real impact on cultural organizations. They are not just mere trips. Some technicians travel to some European capitals. Adeste project provided us with knowledge to change things we were doing in our organization, but also allowed us to get legitimacy to introduce those changes internally. Because thanks to that, we could change things and have some legitimacy from the European Union. It was not the people in the communication department proposing to change and going from the scenario to people. It was the European Union that was saying that, and internally that facilitated things a lot. I'll tell you our trip, our 6-year trip throughout the development and implementation of strategy. Zaragoza is culture. That is the name of the program. There is no equipment of facilities. It is a plan for culture or targeting culture for all the city. It is a working in progress project. We are all the time introducing changes, etc., etc. But let's move on to the very beginning. In 2014, we were working in a different way in terms of communication. We started to work jointly, communication and programming departments, in a type of war-like marketing. So exhibitions were not offered only at venues. We used buses, public buses, so the train station. We had a program called En la Frontera, on the border, and that allowed us to connect with an audience on the street. So we changed the strategy from focused on the product to focused on people. We went out to the street to connect with people. We changed the communication traditional channels, and Zaragoza Cultural absorbed another public company that was the auditorium with 20 years of history. Main classical singers and international singers had been there. Interesting the facilities, but it was kind of dead, and also going bankruptcy, from a technical standpoint. And then there was no new audiences, so the audiences were being lost and no more income. In that context, looking for information to try to change things, then we got in contact with ZGZ project. We contacted Deusto University, and we got training. We got to know other experiences from other partners that allowed us to change things. Here you have the plan design. First, we do a plan for all the city, and there are 3 main phases that have been overlapping. Auditorium in Zaragoza, we started with that. We went to Deusto. We started with Adeste to design a plan of audiences, and we ended up with a plan for the whole city. In the 3 phases that have also been modified, in auditorium has been mostly developed. Then we started to work with theaters, museums. But internally, we faced many problems when integrating the data protection law and the different legal entities regarding the different departments of the City Council. And then we also worked with the cultural sector, festivals, etc., outside the City Council of Zaragoza. In that context, Harinera became an interesting project with great impact even outside the city. And we integrated the new policies promoted by the government of Zaragoza, focused on the common good culture and developing audiences. Thanks to all this, we incorporated Harinera in Adeste Plus, that is the European project Zaragoza collaborates with. To tell you the truth, what we have done in Zaragoza has been very different from the previous experiences. We created even a mark with a specific graphic design, as you can see here, and we linked some values. There was a work of conceptualization, developing an innovative line of action in terms of cultural communication. Graphic design and the branding work allowed us to develop a different strategy. Here you see Zaragoza is Cultura, it's a community of communities that are interconnected, and the persons are at the heart. We work for the public and the non-public. We are a public administration, but we have to assume the responsibility that everybody knows what we are doing in the city, and at the same time give response to all cultural proposals. Not only our proposals, there are many proposals coming from others, so it has to be a bi-directional communication with people. As I said, this is our challenge and focus, Harinera Zaragoza, Harinera ZGZ. We want to do kind of the same thing that we did with the auditorium. Right now we are doing some research and analysis to try to identify how to integrate in this development of audiences the community culture, because the codes we have are different. In auditorium we have ticketing data. In Harinera we have emotional service. So in that framework, we are working with Adeste Plus to find a methodology to coordinate this work and move forward and connect with more people in terms of culture. because we firmly believe that a person consuming culture will be easier to get that person visiting the auditorium or another cultural scenario. And that's how we have designed the communication strategy, taking that into account. Well, here you have the auditorium. It has been transformed. We have multiplied by 4 the ticketing sales. We have changed a logic that we had up to now. Also, we have been able to attract younger audience, younger people to classical music concerts, working with big data. When you sell most of the auditorium is 2 hours after sending the newsletter we send every Thursday. So the new communication tools developed are working very well. We are trying to generate engagement with the community, establish a bi-directional communication channel, and we also have surveys with the audience and the workers of the auditorium because they are our eyes on an everyday basis. We are trying to enlarge our experience because surveys and focus groups told us the auditorium audience pay a lot of money to go to a classical concert, but they wanted to enjoy more the cultural event. So we sent some lists where they can listen to concerts and the notes of the program, so they can enjoy the concert as an enlarged cultural experience. Here you have the plan. This is the origin of it all. I will not go into detail. Here you have the double objective to democratize culture. Everything is based on 2 terms, access and participation. And from then on, we have 4 main strategies. One is a priority digital strategy to interact the community, communication, improvement of engagement, or the work with data. And those strategies are developed with specific tools promoted by our communication department, but they're not just mere communication tools. Right now, we are facing a great moment. The most important part is content. Content is a priority for all citizens to enjoy culture. Best way to connect with community, we think, is through this content. Content is usability and inclusion. Explain culture, make it accessible, because many times citizens do not know our programs, our agendas, but if you explain it to them and you generate interest and with the language they understand, then you are breaking down that content into different channels and you will be able to connect with them. Our challenge now is to make explained culture, make it accessible, and that is based on cultural participation and to do away with some access barriers. For example, the mere fact of not knowing, or maybe I do not know whether I can behave well in an auditorium. Think that the classical concerts, well, you have to have certain code of conduct, and maybe you're not ready for that. So we are developing a strategy where the priority is content, and content leads all the rest. Here you have some tools. That's what we're working on PDA. Here you have the 4 strategies of the plan. We interrelate them. And there are 4 main tools, CRN, or big data, ticketing, relational marketing, and content. And then we analyze data. We elaborate and draft newsletters that are customized. We play with prices. We do price promotion. We have social media plan. We work for new audiences. We work with the community and for the community, different formulae to reach our aim, that is to connect with our audience. An example of some different things that we're doing now is the project Pilar Joven, targeting the youth. In one of the surveys, we identified that people from 12 to 18 years of age, they thought they did not have an activity during the Pilar festivities. Pilar is our Virgin Saint here in Zaragoza, no? And they thought that they were too young to participate in adult activities, but very grown up for kids activities. So we started to talk to them and we proposed them to get organized through the youth department so that they could propose their own activities with YouTubers, video games, with different activities after all. And they could be the owners of their own leisure activity. And last time in Pilar, more than 100 young people came to the auditorium in Zaragoza. That is another of our tools. Of our communication plan, we also work with the education department. A fundamental phase of our plan, for example, that school kids come to visit the auditorium or other cultural facilities, that is fundamental, or that they go to the museums, and the fact that they live at a certain quarter or with lower income, they do not face a problem. And there are other people working in the city council to promote that link between the little citizens and cultures. Well, 68,000 students come every year to visit cultural facilities in Zaragoza. Right now, we are developing the analytical strategy. Well, when you start working on Odysseys, you may go mad with data. No? Your obsession is to have data about everything, measure everything, and then all of a sudden you realize the key issue is not data. The key issue lies on questions. So this is our challenge, to develop an analytical strategy at the same level we have the digital strategy. And for that, what do we want to measure? Well, the social impact, the population we target, where our users come from, establish the measurements to study the quantitative impact on our social environment. But we also want to measure parity, because to see the inequality, access, income, education, territory, and how they impact on our community is a very complex task, and we have to take it into account. We also study users. We are working, for example, now on the involvement degree of the community with Zaragoza is culture. Loyalty is also very important. We want to know how to retain our users and how to promote the transfer of audiences and how audience behaves in those cultural facilities. It is also important to follow up the number of tickets, the occupation level, when they buy those tickets. And big data is allowing us to work on interesting data. Economic impact is not the most important thing, but after all, well, the balance has to be right, so we need to analyze income and the average income or profit per ticket. And as I was saying, this is the last one, but not the least important, but rather the most important, content. The scope of that content, the conversion, how many people read us, how many people does it click to buy, and how many people after all attend those cultural activities. And not everything is online. It is also important to have other channels of communication with the youth. In that program, Pilar Joven, online communication has been key. And that is when we have to think of it as a global strategy.
El reto es complejo y a su vez también es apasionante.
Challenge is very complex, but also very passionate. It's allowing us to learn a lot. Adeste Plus started last month of December. We're going to work with some workshops, and it will allow us to establish different methodologies to continue advancing in this development of audiences. I know that Zaragoza's culture is working very well in the city, because a good indicator is that many cultural players get angry if they are not present in our social media, for example, because they think that it is a very important communication tool to connect. So I'd like to finish with a tweet from last month of May that defines very well Zaragoza's culture, our program. It is the party or festivity promoted by the City Council of Zaragoza, so that everybody is invited. We're talking about diversity. Everybody should have the same invitation, equity. That invitation should be understood by everybody. There is no barrier, physical or mental barrier, to reach that party. We're talking about accessibility, global accessibility. And we also want everybody to be invited to dance, but with their music, not with our music. We're talking about inclusion. As a public administration, our responsibility is that everybody does their own party, has their own party, and now the trip moves on, and now it is in the hands of Adeste Plus. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for this very comprehensive and inspiring presentation. You raised many of the questions that we will later go on into the debate. So now I give the word to Laure Dalon from Musée de Picardie. If you want to go on a little bit about what your institution is and some of the interesting projects that you have developed in the sphere of smart places, such as small cabinets of curiosity or others.
Okay, thank you, Juan. Well, the Musée de Picardie is a museum, a French museum. Amiens is a city in the north of Paris. The museum actually is the first museum built in France. I know it's very impressive, but it's true. It's a building built in the middle of the 19th century, a very impressive building with very large collections. From archaeological collections to contemporary art, we have antiquities, medieval items, fine arts, like paintings or sculptures. So it's a very large collection. That's why I think Juan explained that I'm quite a classic curator, and actually it's true.
Classic doesn't mean the way of how interactive the process, because for us it's extremely enriching having such an institution like yours, because we're new institutions, so this is something very positive for us.
Yes, but this project for us and for me is very inspiring, because I was quite classic. I don't know in a positive or negative way, but quite classic historian, art historian. But as a director of this museum, I feel I have the responsibility of increase our audience and to speak to everybody in a way. So I think curators can't be alone in their storages or in their offices, and we have the responsibility to feel what people and what audiences expect today. And it's quite different from what they expected 10 years ago, for instance. The most important thing I can say about the museum today is that it's closed. because of renovation, but it's a great occasion to improve things and to think about what is a museum today. When we are open, we are, I think, less able maybe to think about that. We have time to think about what we want to offer to people and who are our visitors, actually. We try to meet them, to talk with people who are interested in the museum. And it's very inspiring because they said things they help us to create a new offer for the museum of today. Our reopening is planned at the end of this year. It would be quite difficult, but we tried to be ready for this December. And of course, we have new works to show, new things to tell, but we try to rethink our cultural offer and to include the fact that people want new things in museums today. Like, of course, we have a tradition of mediation in our museum. Conferences, visits, talks in front of works of art. But we understand we have to propose new things like funniest proposals for young people. Actually, it's one of our goals to interest young people, and it's not very easy in a classic museum today. We have to try to offer shorter visits, for instance, or to try to find the good time to invite people to come. So I'm sure that next year will be a great test, and we will see what is well known and what is not well planned. But I feel we are very lucky to think about that today, and Smart Places is a good occasion for us to think about that, to hear about other experiences. We had this experience with the Museum of Liechtenstein, for instance. In Amiens, we developed a kind of a tool years ago called the Cabinet of Curiosity, which is inspired by European tradition of Cabinet of Curiosity. We have a mobile showcase. It's quite a big showcase, but it allows us to show works outside of the museum and to show those works in places like schools or hospitals or even country halls, for instance. And we planned a project with our colleagues from Liechtenstein in a high school from Amiens. We put in that showcase items from Liechtenstein, and I'm sorry to say that people in France know Liechtenstein by the name, but nobody knows where it is and what is the culture of this so little country. So it was a discovery for every people, and it was a discovery for those students and teenagers to have these items in their high school. They had teachers very well involved in the project, and they had the cabinet during 3 months. And they created many projects around this cabinet, which allows them to understand the culture of this country and to understand how we are linked with other countries and what are the differences between us. So for us, we were involved with the mediation with the teachers, but then teachers developed their own projects around the items, and it was very inspiring for us. And during this period of renovation, it helped us to think about new projects for the reopened museum, because that created a new relationship between audience, in a way, and works of art or cultural items, and a museum. And it's the case of ours. A museum creates often a gap. I'm sorry to tell that, but there is often a gap between people of today and a classic museum. You have to be quiet. You have to be serious. You are sure you are going to hear so many things, not always interesting. So for children. No, for children it's not so complicated. For teenagers, it could be complicated. So there is a gap, and with this mobile showcase, you have a more a closer relationship with items, and we want to create this kind of relationship in the reopened museum. I think it's our big challenge for the reopened museum. I try to develop a kind of a human approach. I would like that people in the museum are not there to hear and to learn something from. I don't know how to say in English. I want people feel they are a part of the history. You are in a museum, but it's not another history too far from you that speaks about people who lived decades ago or centuries ago, but you are a part of this kind of history. And we try to create tools in the museum, or even to the way we choose the works and the presentation. We try to create a new relationship with works of art, but in the same way we have to respect the identity of this place and not to deny this identity. So we have to offer something well balanced between classic vision, which is an expectation also of people who are coming in a museum, but with new approaches proposed to visitors. I think it's a bit abstract, but it's the challenge for the end of this year.
Okay, thank you very much, Laure. We'll have time to debate some of the issues you raised, how to integrate these new ways, these new platforms also for classic institutions, which are I think it's a clear challenge. So thank you. And now Britta Lerch from smARTplaces. It's up to you, Britta.
I think Laure already gave a really good practical introduction into the project and what all institutions who partake in our collaboration project had in mind, or what questions they asked themselves when joining the project, how to find new ways on relating to the audiences, how to engage with them in a different ways, and also how to allow yourself to explore new perspectives in a way. And I think it's in our project, it's a long-term project. It runs over 4 years. We have 8 partners. Laure and Musée de Picardie is one of them, from 8 different countries. So you can imagine what diverse approaches, local identities really come together, and have been working since 2016 in exploring new possibilities in how to engage with audiences via digital means, explore new ways of cultural mediation, co-participation, and also in being brave enough to invest in capacity building, because what we really figured when we first applied in 2014 was that if we talk about using digital tools in regards to audience development and engagement, you can't let yourself be driven by technology. We understood really, really early on that technology can only be an enabler of moving forward in these terms, but you can't let yourself be driven by technology, because we all know when we set up the project in 2013, in terms of digital timelines, we are already a century beyond now. So what was applicable in 2013 might not be relevant in 2019. And the biggest questions we all had when joining this project was, how can we keep up? How can we really, because we know we have audiences that are so digitally enabled, we have to admit, far beyond what we are capable of in keeping up with these technologies. And so how do we find the right balance there in not being driven by this digital shift and still stay relevant in these terms? And I think these were the initial questions all of our partners had when they joined the project. And since 2016, we have been working together very intensively with a very extensive work program as well. Just to give you an impression, we have more than 57 joint and local activities that are implemented. So it's quite a challenge as well to keep track of all the milestones and what we want to accomplish. And we were really, really grateful that the European Commission and the Creative Europe program co-funded our project and supported our approach there. And since then, we have been working in a lot of dimensions.
Okay, so now after all things you have raised, we have quite half an hour to debate. So I'll go up, open the file with, Sonia, you gave many insights of clear examples. Many of the things that we have prepared are really in your presentation, but going back to the point, imagine we come from scratch. How would you define connecting with audiences? It's physical. We go to the classical ones. It's physical attendance and shows, exhibitions, venues. It's exhibition visitors, streaming viewers. That's a new one. It's nice that Britta pointed that out.
For us, the most important thing is the questions, not the data. For us to have this bidirectional relationship with people is focused on the question. If you have the correct question, you have the correct data. This is the secret to be success in the audience development plan. I think the most important thing, because when you start to work with data, you get crazy with data. You want to know all things about your public, your audience. You want to have many data, but if you don't have the correct question, you can't get any goal. The challenge is to manage the data in the correct way, I think.
What's your view on that, Britta, Laure?
I would say that's an ideal solution or situation. I think we all would like to be more capable of really drawing the right conclusions from the data we're gathering. We have been debating this quite a lot, I think, in the consortium as well. And I think it's about finding the right balance between not becoming data leechers, where we just collect data and data and data and store it and then become overwhelmed as well. What conclusions do we want to draw out of this data? But to also, I think what needs to be raised more is a focus on qualitative data. Really asking your audiences, what do you want? What do you expect from us? How would you like to contribute? How would you like to make your cultural institution your own? How can you influence these institutions as well? And I think this is less about data, real data, or quantitative measures, but about a qualitative assessment of needs and expectations as well, and managing these.
But when you are working in a big audience development plan for the whole city, we have data from the ticketing in the auditorium, but in the Harinera Zaragoza, we have emotional surveys. It's difficult to work with different kind of data, and we need to focus on the questions. This is the secret to improve every day in our audience development plan, I think.
I fully agree with that, because with what you said, Britta, because usually we're very obsessed with data gathering, also with our social networks reach. I think one of the features of the original Smart Places plan 5 years ago was we'll have fantastic platforms to gather all data, measure everything, but we have seen that you can have a fantastic reach or impact in social networks, in Twitter, Facebook. 5 times ago there was Blogger. Do you remember that? And this doesn't lead to, very often, to physical attendance or to making really inclusive programs. There's not real debate or interaction. You can get Twitter questions or Facebook questions. Of course, that's interesting, but to assess a program and to see if there's real flow between your users and you need much more than that. I think, for example, small cabinets of curiosity is a clear example of how to co-create one program with your audience, with the visitors, with the teachers, schools, telling them what's Liechtenstein, what's the reality of that country, what's yours. Or co-creation is, you have to listen to your audience.
Yes, numbers are, of course, we are happy when we can say 400 of children have been there in that room with a cabinet. That's great. But the more inspiring moment and the more important for me is the presentation, the exhibition of their works. And that's very interesting, and you can see some of them are there to explain what they have done, and their passion actually is very more important than the numbers after that. Yes, this precise moment is an experience interesting for us.
Absolutely. And of course, you don't have just one audience, not even for an auditorium or for an opera, but in institutions, cultural institutions like the ones present at Smart Places. I'm thinking about Dortmunder or Azkuna Centroa in Bilbao, or even Etopia. You don't have one audience, but many. In our case, we're evolving from I wouldn't say classic, but from a technology center. If you remember 5 years ago, we said we don't want Etopia to be a cathedral for freaks. Just that. We're evolving also to a more contemporary culture approach. But for us, these kinds of institutions who are multifunctional centers, how would you focus on your audiences, on one audience or two audience, or your public, without overlapping the rest of and engaging the community? Do you have the magic solution?
We have created Zaragoza Escultura because of that, the strong community, because to avoid overlap any audience. This is the secret, the starting point of the Zaragoza Escultura, Zaragoza is culture, is this the starting point, because we need something to include all people in the city, not only focusing on the auditorium or in the theater, in the principal theater. Because of that, the need to include all people in our audience development plan was the moment when we decided to start with Zaragoza Escultura, with the audience development plan for the whole city. Because of that, because we want public for all cultural institutions in the city, not only for the auditorium or not only for the Harinera. And because of that, I think the public administration have the responsibility, has the responsibility to improve the audience for the whole cultural sector in the city, not only for their own spaces.
Any views on that?
Yes, actually, we have a very large audience too. Our main goal for the end of this year is to involve young people, because they are the audience of tomorrow, and they have different habits from our classic audience. That's why we have to think about to think about a new offer for them, and that's not quite simple because they hopes change a lot, and it depends on the age, and it depends on the schools there are in. So it's quite complicated. It's not. You do not have one answer. You have to try many things to have these people. And as I said before, we have to convince also our classic audience, so art historian or I don't know how to say our oldest visitors, but there are the bases, so we have to interest them also. They have to recognize themselves in the place they like, and they like for years, even for decades. So it's a balance.
Yeah, that's for sure, especially important in such a consolidated institution as yours. In our cases, for example, I think about Dortmund or us, we're new institutions, we're still young, we don't have such a consolidated public, but in your case, wow, with such a fantastic permanent collection, and not to lose your identity is also, I think you have big opportunity also with the renovation and the restyling of formats and to create new formats and languages. And going back to this topic, here there's something very interesting in your presentation, Sonia, which is you're talking also, Laure, about the young and the adults. There's clearly a bridge between them. What you are doing with youth service, with Servicio de Juventud in Pilar Joven, it's quite common challenge for many of our publics. In our case, for example, we have a very large community of kids, teenage who are from 6 till 13, and when they are 13, 14, they don't want to go to activities for kids because they're not kids anymore. They are too young to come to adults. So this gap between 13 and 19, we're proposing new activities also as well to fidelize, to make them public, to create a bridge between these two segments of audience. So it's hard, it's complicated.
The young gap exists in culture. It's a problem. There are no engaged young people with culture, with traditional culture. And we are working in participatory processes to connect with young people. We think that the secret is to involve young people in the co-creation, cultural co-creation. In Young Pilar, in Pilar Joven, this has been working for 2 years very well, and we are very proud of that. And young people are working with us and with technicians to design the activities in the Pilar Festival, but then they take part in the activities. 30,000 young people were in the Pilar Festival last year. It's a big success for us. But the main idea for us now, we are working in the participatory processes. I think it's involve people, engage people, to make culture with people is the secret.
absolutely the importance of co-creation.
And I think the importance is there not to just start co-creating and participation once you already have a clear impression of what you want to do and of your activity, and then approach your local audiences and make them take part in it, but to already involve them in the creation element, and also to let go a little bit and take their ideas not for granted, but actually treat them with respect and let them see the results in the end result there and document, and you reach a lot higher, I think, level of identity building there, and feeling a sense of ownership and passing this on to the audiences. And I think this is really important. When do you start to talk to your audiences? At what point?
Yeah. Our starting point was a survey.
Yeah, that's...
Yes, for us it's linked with the image of the museum, I think. And we tried a new experience for 2 years. During clothing, we are working with a drawer, and it explains the renovation with comics, you know, and we can feel it. It changes. The image of the museum, because it's the content is quite serious, you know, but the way we are talking about is quite different from before, and there is a curiosity about that, and from the adults, also from the teenagers.
But the digital users, for example, in the auditorium, it's difficult to connect with people that never has been in a classical concert, for example. The gap is in every space, in the auditorium, in the theater, because there are some barriers, there are some problems to access in the culture. I think every audience development plan has their own barriers, their own gaps.
I think a lot of audiences are still used to a very traditional approach, where the communication is very one-sided and very object-driven from the institutions. And to initiate a two-way communication is really, really tricky. When we had at smARTplaces, one of the joint activities is a work of art. There was an edition here at Etopia yesterday, and it's a series of live dialogues that is streamed via social media. And I think for all of our institutions who partake, it was the first experiment in using live stream, but not just live streaming what's happening on the stage like we're doing today, but actually giving the audience, the social media audience, the possibility to ask questions live on stage and learn more about the people behind the cultural institutions, the people who really shape art, culture, and these offers in the cities, and learn more about how does a curator work, what are the thought processes of artists in creating artworks, and also to learn more about professions that are not usually that visible in the cultural scene. And when we started it and created the concept, I know we had a lot of discussions about, okay, what is if no one asks a question? Or what is if the questions are too plain? Do we lose our image then as a really, really center of society and a sophisticated understanding of art and culture as well? And I think we were all very nervous and anxious before the first edition, and then equally surprised in the high quality questions that were asked. And once you started, it's usually this thing, someone has to start the conversation, and the first questions came and went on, and we started with this format for, I think, half an hour was the initial design of it. We even had editions, and we turned off the live stream after 1 hour and kept on discussing with the live audience in the auditorium for another hour. And that was really, really impressive, and how such a format is live streaming. If you have a format where you really can connect an on-site audience who are in the auditorium and an online audience, and they become one. And I think this is a really, really interesting way of offering new forms of engagement there, and very successful activity as well for us.
Work of art is definitely a good example of how to integrate digital to digital activities with also more analogic or more classic debates, because one of our main concerns, for example, in this new institution, is basically not to scare people through technology. This free cathedral effect. Okay, you can come to Etopia to know, or to Dortmund to know how last gadget of 3D printing works, but it's also fun to come here and to have a nice debate with one author of a book and having a beer later with him. So how do we narrate and blend together these formats? I mean, work of art is a clear example, no? But it's very important also, I think, to somehow integrate offline debate and online debate. As you said, we have been using online questionnaires for years. Then we discovered a couple of years ago that it's also important to have a print paper and let people give them the feedback. Yes, more difficult than later to put everything online, but it's definitely otherwise you're neglecting a big part of your audience. Are your experience on this in the Musée, for example? Or?
We have to try new tools, but digital things are not in our habits, for instance. That's why smARTplaces is a great challenge and a great place to learn about the experience from each other, because we are very classic for this thing too.
For us, online and offline strategies work together. It's the need to be together in the middle of the strategy. Digital strategy is the most important strategy, but the participatory process, the young people is closer than technology, but we need to work with the community in the participatory process. It's the way to connect with the toolkit you need in your toolkit, offline and online tools.
And I think you still need to explain how to use it, because there's still a really great level of resistance to use an app or use an app that enhances your visit, maybe, or to use location-based services in a museum. And even though you offer it, it doesn't mean that your audience is actually aware that you offer it, and they're not really aware how to use it. So you still need a lot of offline communication means there, so that the audiences get the feeling, yes, I can't, it's not scary something, just try it out and see what it can do for my visit or my perception of the art. But a lot of people still don't pick it up, I think. And I think there's a lot more work to do in the next coming years as well, to make it more like a seamless experience.
Yeah, this is linked also to what you were stressing about the questions. What do you ask, and the contents of everything? Because if you remember, Britta, 5 years ago when we started developing smARTplaces, the original conception, even before we all joined the project, was we will develop a content-based located app, and everything will be fine with the platform, and thousands of people will gather, well, not the Reina Sofia or the Prado or the Le Louvre or even your museum with fantastic collection. And is what we have learned is that you need an app, of course, but you need to mediate. The importance of mediation with this app, teaching the people what they can do, how they can use it, what's it for, don't delete it after you leave the center. That's a lessons learned.
and give very clear instructions as well. It's also
Yeah.
a question of language you use and using the right language for your very different audience segments. They want to be approached in different ways and in their own words and languages there. But it's not only a question how do you communicate it towards the audiences, but how do you communicate it internally, so that you can actually really get your colleagues, get the different departments on board and creating a digital experience that really represents the whole institution and not just, let's say, the communication department or just the mediation department, cultural education department, but you want to really express all these different aspects each institution has to offer. And so the first step there is to start a mindset change and a change of perspective in the staff as well, because creating content, and I think we gained really, really good experiences in creating our app, which is in stores just this week. So if you like to try it out, it's available for iOS and Android. But all partners, I think, can attest that creating content for an app is something completely different than creating content for a website or an exhibition catalog or a flyer. And there are a lot more challenges to take into account when developing. And I think we all can also agree in times it became very frustrating. And so we're even more happy about the end result because the app is not, we emphasize to not just be another museum app. So it is not an app where you can buy tickets or receive informations or read 20 pages about the history of the institutions, but we wanted to make sure that this app actually works via augmented reality elements to give new ways of experiences the offers. We also see it as an experiment. We understand this project to be a really safe test environment where we can explore the possibilities, but where we also allow ourselves to learn, fail sometimes, and then improve the next edition. So with the app, we wanted to explore, are there different ways in storytelling? So one element of the app is called a story world, where we use playful elements to dive deeper into the stories each of our own places has to offer, the stories behind it, the people behind it. We wanted to use these apps so everyone can get a better impression how what this place really has to offer besides the traditional exhibitions or besides workshops or seminars or tours. And so it's a very playful experience we are trying to facilitate there. And yeah, we're really curious on how audiences will use this app and how it will develop over the next months. It's a living organism. It's not set in stone, but we really, really hope to further develop it and add virtual tours or location-based services there and see how we can work with them. And I think what's really crucial there is not every technology is will be practical to use for each institution, because the effort and the capacities needed to really keep apps running, update them, the technical development, the technical maintenance as well. It really needs a lot of staff members involved, and you really have to see, okay, how much time and how much budget can you invest in these digital tools that are not supposed to replace your visitor experience, but to enhance it. So what value do you give these things? And I think this is we have to really have a really open discussion about this as well and reflect on the facts and practicalities there.
Yeah, yes. Enhance your visitor experience is one of the main concerns that we all have. What is clear is that in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, audience development has become an important concern, even I would say an obsession for all cultural centers, wherever our activities or speciality is. And if you remember some years ago, if an exhibition turned well with good visitor numbers, or the conference yearly went on well with an established audience. Everything went fine, but now we have that's not enough. We are somehow evolving to a moment if we don't engage new audience, if there's no interaction, inclusion, you cannot repeat the same festival for 10 years. You cannot do the same kind of exhibition. So, of course, now that's during the conception, during the activity, and later in the evaluation processes. So, do you think that this awareness for more systematic content management has led to is there a booming on audience development now? Do you think we're entering a kind of dangerous bubble? What's your opinion?
I don't know. In the past, when a cultural activity didn't work, people blamed always communication department. Today, we make us different questions. The price is correct, the hour, the target, the campaign, the content. We ask them what is the problem? The question is, what is the problem? Bubble, I think no. There aren't any bubble. But looking away from the stage and focus on the public doesn't mean doing everything for the audience. I think we now know well that this is not the point, and we need to know the needs of our audience, the existing and the potential audience. And I think this is one of the most important tasks for audience development today.
Which are your views on this?
In my opinion, one of the most important things in the Smart Places project is the change management, actually. Because to develop audience, we have to change some of our habits. And it's not very easy. And I don't want to blame anybody. It's complicated to create a new relationship with audience. In our cultural institutions, in an institution just like ours, which is ancient and based on classic foundations, we have to change our minds. I think a little bit, just as I explained before, and I think Habay is a great help for us. But it's we can see in the team some people are very interested in this change management, and other people are quite scared and not very convinced by that, and they don't want to change their way of working, actually. Because I think there is a fear about we are going to lose our identity, or we don't want to be too superficial. We want to be to do things that are deep things, but for me, there are no contraries. You can be serious and funny. You just have to balance well the two sides.
I would agree also with Sonia and Laure. It's less about developing audiences and just reaching out to random new audiences you think might be interested. If they're not interested, you're not going to make them interested in what you have to offer. But it's more about building these relationships with them. So it's more about relationship management and audience engagement, because development is a very dry and very not really defined term. There are many interpretations to it, and everyone, if you ask 10 institutions, they will have all different interpretations of what audience develop means for them. So I think it's what Laure says is really important, that you change the habits or mindsets as well in your institutions and become more open and reaching out to these audiences, getting into dialogues with them, and also allowing yourself to lose control. and be brave. And as you said, there is a fear in losing this control, but it can also be very enriching. And I think this is something we experience in our project. For example, experience with new narratives or new elements of storytelling, and that were very unusual to use for a lot of institutions in our consortium so far. And it took a while to use these new techniques and experiment with them, and then see suddenly realize what great programs you're actually creating. You were just not able to communicate it or find your language and express this with the language an audience understands. So I think it is a lot about opening up and less about connecting, but having relationships. So yeah.
I think that's a common problem for all institutions, not, as you said, not only in classic museums, but also in new institutions. One of the main challenges of this project, and I think also in many other public institutions, is your change management work package, because it's the staff who is basically the main door of, not door, but your main entrance to the public. So we have somehow neglected that for years, and they're really talking with the audience, with the people who are attending many of your activities, how to involve them more actively in the co-creation, in the design of your activities, how to break these barriers between the different levels, because many activities are, some of us are civil servants, there are external contractors, there are cultural managers, companies, so blend all this together is definitely a challenge. And we're finishing with, this is one of our last we have 5 minutes left. So to finish, I may be a bit of repetitive, but do you think we're becoming maybe too obsessed with metrics, data fragmentations, with interaction with our tools? We might say that maybe we neglect other kinds of engaging.
Maybe yes. Laure has said a very interesting word, change. I think in audience development, change is the correct word. In ADST Plus, we has identified the change maker in every organization. Is one person very, very important for us, the change maker, because all knowledge that we are sharing in our project, the change maker should lead this revolution in the organization. And if to finish, for me, the word is change.
I would absolutely agree, because also when you have this one person or one team that become ambassador for transformation, you also increase the confidence. And when you're more confident, then you are more able to use new things, to experiment, and to actually get into dialogue with your colleagues who might not be at this point yet. And you can actually really create really valuable spillover effects. And I think this is something all of our partners attest as well. When one department starts to think new ways and shares the experience, or we learn about what is happening in France or in Spain or in the Netherlands, and we see how it can work in different institutions, we become more confident and less self-conscious there to actually take a step out of our comfort zone and experiment. But you need this person who really initiates this and gives you a good feeling about it, I think, as well.
It's definitely one of the main lessons learned for us in smARTplaces, watching all the internal structure and getting to know the internal structure of all institutions. Some of them are bigger, with very hierarchical departments, communication, programming, marketing, whatever. But we all face this same problematics of change. We try to adopt new formats, create new languages, then someone with an outside view, such as Amhei, for example, comes and tell you, hey guys, you have to break down all your methods of last 2 years, and then, but it's very encouraging, I guess.